My name is Corey Gilbert. I'm the producer and the director of My Name is Alex.
And I'm Jimmy Malone. I'm the writer and co-producer.
The opening scene is a dream sequence, and the way Jimmy originally wrote it was a dream sequence. However, it's changed substantially from Jimmy's script to the way we see it on screen. The main reason why I chose to do that from a directorial standpoint is the character of the figure, which is this figure that is not in the real world. It is in Alex's mind, and it is a representation of his anxiety, but he experiences it both in dreams and in the real world. And so the way that Jimmy wrote this scene on screen, it didn't come across as a dream more than it came across as a suspense scene. Jimmy's intentions were a bit of a misdirect in that he wanted it to seem like a suspense film, but then we find out that it's more of this journey into this man's mind, his psychosis, his anxiety, and his struggle with addiction. I wanted to maintain all those aspects that Jimmy had on the page, but I wanted the audience to know right away, or very soon into the scene, that you were watching potentially a dream sequence. And so the way that we dealt with the figure is that it comes across very clearly that it's probably not real. And so that keeps us misdirected.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the way that I had written it, it was more of a unnecessary gotcha moment, to open with like an action sequence and then to not really have another scene of action for the rest of the movie. We didn't want to set that pace and then not be consistent, through the rest of the film. So to start it out with this fake kind of cheesy chase scene just kind of seemed like it was an injustice. So let's talk about that shot.
The camera rotating is motivated by Alex waking up out of his dream and his dream world breaking down and transitioning us into reality is the second scene in the film. We tried to make this scene a little lighthearted. I'm not the master of comedy. You'll notice in this sequence, it's built with jump cuts. And part of that is to evoke the timing of this crazy moment in the morning when he's late, right? And so the time jumps are motivated by the idea of speed and haste and being late. However, some of that was the editor's decision in actually reducing the runtime, but not for runtime's sake. It actually works very well. And the way that Diego Lopez, our editor, made decisions of when and where to do jump cuts, they work very well. Our editor, Diego, made some great decisions that didn't lose the essence of the slow burn this film needed, but did take a 27-minute film and make it a 20-minute film, which is what it needed to be. The bike riding is a very important piece of the story because Alex, although he's an avid bike rider, he's riding his bike right now out of necessity and not luxury. We make a point to show that even though Deborah's on the phone, she notices this action, and it actually, before she's ever met him, makes her intrigued by him. So when we see the scene later on in the film when they first meet, I think it makes that scene that much more meaningful and powerful for the audience. Again, a great performance by our actor, Crystal Ortiz.
So this parking garage was Wright College. I go to school at Wright College, and we had some qualities for what we needed in a parking deck, and it's very difficult to find a parking garage, or at least an affordable one.
The hospital location, which is in reality a doctor's office. And so finding a hospital is difficult. There are several options in Chicago, actually, hospitals that open themselves up for a lot of the television shows that are filmed in Chicago, lots of the movies that come through Chicago. But the budgets are just not within the range of an independent project like this. And so where we landed was, and it was serendipitous in a way, and many parts of this project were, and where we landed was a doctor's office. It wasn't a hospital, but it was already production designed close enough, and we just needed to bring in a few things to really sell it as a hospital. The production designers did their job to sell this as a hospital, not a doctor's office. We did our jobs as filmmakers on site to design the shots right And the editors did their job in the sequencing, and it sells. And how we got this was a gentleman named Randy, who Jimmy actually knows through Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's a guy that Jimmy is friends with through meetings. And so it became this awesomely serendipitous connection that got us to a location that was very difficult to find, and it ended up being solved in a beautiful way that was inherently connected to the story that Jimmy was writing, which is essentially a biopic on himself. Here's a scene where Croy comes home after having to work that double. The idea is that he left when it was daytime, and by the time he gets home, it's daytime because he's had to work a double with like 20 hours. So he comes home, and it's sort of the end of Act 1 for me, because we've been introduced to him. He's had this weird dream. He woke up late. He ran to work, and then he had to work a double. And he's actually so exhausted that he just passes out on the couch. And what the good side of that is he actually gets a good night's sleep because he was so damn tired. But it's also the end of Act 1 in the sense that we've been introduced to all these elements of his life. And now it's time to do it again. The scene in the kitchen is a simple scene to reinforce Michael's character kind of being in a good place in his life. Things are going well for him. He's healthy. He's eating a banana. The idea that Alex doesn't sleep well, doesn't eat well, and here's this guy that's doing yoga, eating bananas, and seems like he's got all of his crap together. Whether that resonates or not for audiences, maybe it doesn't, but that's the essence behind the meaning of the scene and why we put it in there. So we see the bike ride to work twice, but he actually got a good night's sleep this time around, and he's coasting to work. But it's the same sequence of shots, only a different mood.
You have to talk about your favorite shot in the whole thing.
If I'm asked if I have a favorite shot in the film, it's the shot where Deborah is walking down the steps of her stoop and we're tracking with her. Because it's kind of an old tool that when you have two characters that are about to meet, you want to travel with both of them so that you're going with each of them so that you intersect. It's one of the written rules, obviously, that are meant to be broken, but it's a written rule, so we followed it and it works. And I think the only thing that outdoes the charm in Jimmy's writing is the natural chemistry that these two actors had with each other. Even the crew, after the first take, were just like, wow, these two actors seem like they have been dating for years. But we needed a save the cat moment for Alex, and it wasn't in the very original version of the script. And we needed it, right? Because he's in this terrible place. We're showing all these negative things happening to him. We need to like this guy.
For anybody who is not familiar with the term save the cat moment, it's basically a storytelling device that's used to let the audience know that this is a character that you're supposed to like. Basically, you show the character doing something respectable or morally responsible.
This is Alex's save the cat moment, where he comforts this little boy in a very horrifying time for someone his age. And he's sitting in a doctor's office with his mom, knowing that his mom is awaiting what could potentially be some very bad news in terms of her health. And when you're an 8-year-old boy, there's nothing more terrifying than that. And what Alex does here is he takes that very terrifying moment and he makes it really comfortable for this little boy. And the little boy ultimately repays him with a Starburst candy, which from a little boy's perspective is a huge payment.
One of the cool script-to-screen changes that we went through happened with finding this doctor's office. Was that originally Alex meets Owen, this little boy, and Owen is sitting outside of a hospital room, and his mom is inside the hospital room at the bedside with her mother, and she's filling out power of attorney paperwork. So then when we found this doctor's office, we're like, well, this works, but, you know, once you see the room that the scene takes place in, the table that you only see in a doctor's office. So we thought, well, now we can't have her visiting her sick mother on this examination table. You don't visit sick people in a doctor's office.
We were like, you know what? Grandmas are older. Grandmas die. That's what they do. It's not very traumatic in storytelling for a grandma to die. We put him in a place where his mom could die. And then Alex truly shines by comforting him in only the way that Alex knows how to do it. because he's such a natural. I think that it's another moment where Croy Galima, who plays Alex, shines with his performance, and it's my favorite scene in the film. One of the things that we want to do is show his awesome side, and what he's awesome at is his job. When he's there and he's engaged, he's really good at what he does. He's a natural empath, and he knows how to comfort people. He's like Nate Fisher in 6 Feet Under. If you're familiar with that show, the dad always said, hey, you're running away from this, but you have a gift of comforting people. And that's Alex.
But I was going to mention, too, that Ambria Sylvan, who plays Owen's mom, had the fewest lines of anyone in the film. It was just a very tough, emotional place for her to be in, and she nailed it. It was amazing.
Yeah, and the way Jimmy just described it was our direction to her. Here's this character who is scared out of her mind because she might have cancer or whatever it is. But at the same time, she's got her 8-year-old son there, and moms are supposed to be brave. They're supposed to not be scared so that their child doesn't have to be. And so she had to give this nonverbal, another character in the film, there's a lot of this, they had to give this nonverbal, very short and brief performance. But as with everything in a short film, because films are so short, if you're only in it for 15 seconds, that's the same as being in it for 25 minutes in a feature. That's how important your character is, and that's how important your moment is. And she did it perfectly. This trigger moment of his ex-girlfriend calling and stressing him out, and it's actually breaks him from the feeling good moment that he got from Owen, because it carried all the way home with him. And he pulls the Starburst out of his pocket, and he remembers, and he's still feeling good about himself. He's like in his sweet zone of this natural gift that he has, which is why he's good at his job of being an empath, natural empath. And he's comforting Owen, and he knows he's doing good at it, and he knows he's being successful because he knows he's good at it. And so he's actually back sort of almost when he was in a good place in his life. And so we break from our regular approach technically on the film, and we go handheld, we go long lenses, and we get a little more emotive and personal. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why there was 2 sequences in a row that were handheld, and were really the only moments we did handheld, except if you count the bike ride scene. But I count the bike ride scene as pseudo handheld, I guess, for lack of a better term. And then all of a sudden he's pulled out of that because his phone rings, and it's his ex-girlfriend, and she goes to scream at him and ream him out for this stupid thing that he did a few days ago. And so we continue the handheld because this is still very real for him as well. And then it triggers the figure. It triggers his anxiety represented through the figure. And then we have one other handheld moment, which is the POV of the figure, which is the only time we ever do a POV of it. And essentially what we learn later is that it's because he's staring at himself.
So we're at the diner scene. This is definitely my favorite scene of the film. We saw maybe 6 or 7 actors come in to audition for this role of Brian. And then we met Christopher Walsh, and he'd given this character a lot of thought and kind of had an idea of where this guy would be. And it's never directly mentioned in the script, but we decided Brian is a member of AA, and he had met Alex just one other time, and they had exchanged business cards. So then some time had gone by, and this is them meeting again. So that was the backstory. So I know many, many Brians, and this character was written as an amalgamation of a couple different people that I've met in the program. And we ended up writing in some extra scene because we wanted to give Brian's character more story. When Christopher read for the audition, where he had started with his character, tone and attitude and mentality, he was about 90% where he needed to be for the day of production. So we were both very excited to see him work on set for the day of production, and it was great.
What I love about Chris is, and this is my interpretation personally, as just a layman in the world of addiction, programs that are out there to help folks that are in roles like him that are sponsors. He came across to me as almost so iconic of what I picture in my mind for a guy like this. He's almost a parody of it, but it's awesome, right? Like, a lot of times as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, I try to break icons, I try to break molds and try to put people, like, let's not cast the guy that's supposed to look exactly like the guy. And what I love about Chris is that he's almost that, but not totally, for me at least. But he's just enough to be almost that he's a storytelling piece just physically, right? So the performance, we can all agree, was perfect. He's a great actor. I mean, he's just totally awesome. You can tell he's seasoned. You can tell he's a pro. And, we all know, like, all actors are talented, and they are. But he was perfect for the role, and that's why we cast him. You can almost watch it without any sound, and you know who this guy is. You know what he's doing there, talking to this other guy late night in a diner. But without it being a parody of itself. And that's what I love about Chris.
Yeah, even, his laughs and his leans. This character, Brian, has seen 50 Alexes over the years and is probably the sponsor for 8 or 9 different people. So he kind of goes into this knowing what to expect. But like Corey said, the seasoned nature of who Chris Walsh was representing was just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. A couple of other points I'll make on the diner scene are the framing, and it was another very personal moment that it becomes very real for Alex. It was dialogue heavy, driven by Brian and his counsel to Alex. And so I wanted the audience to feel the actors and be with the actors and not be looking at anything else going on. And so we did long lenses on this. If you look at the backgrounds of these characters in these 2 shots, it was very deliberate. The background behind Alex is very dark. It's very stagnant. There's no movement. But if you look at the background then, conversely to Brian, it's brighter. Street lights are on. You see cars going by. There's some people walking by a couple of times. There's lots of movement. That was obviously intentional, metaphorical, to evoke what Brian represents, and then to evoke where Alex is in his life currently.
I wanted to mention, so the diner is Wishbone, and we wanted to make sure that this story took place in Chicago. So we did want to make sure that we were showing the bones of Chicago, with the Wishbone Diner. And then the next scene on the bike ride, he's on the 606.
It's a non-sappy love letter to Chicago. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about this scene, 2 things. One, the music.
Mm-hmm.
Chris's music's perfect for it. It's the ultimate dark moment, and that's why he takes off. It's the fight or flight concept, and he chose flight because he didn't know how to deal with being called an alcoholic by the one person that he knows is right. The other thing that's interesting about that sequence is how we did it. In homage to our independent budget, it was pretty DIY. It was actually a guy named Rick who goes by Rickshaw Rick. He's got his rickshaw fashioned for rigging cameras and lighting equipment to the back of it so that you can do these tracking shots and these follow and leading shots with your character on a bike. And that's what we did. And our key grip fashioned a key light off of this rickshaw, utilizing Rick's amazing rigging that was already built in for us. And we were able to shoot a scene in the middle of the night and still light it enough to key our subject. And it worked out really well. We're coming up to sort of what I call the final act of the film. He goes on this long bike ride and, in a sense, he cools off, for lack of a better term. We all know that our bodies naturally use adrenaline to make us even out and actually feel better mentally. It doesn't cure us. It's not going to cure Alex, but he had this long bike ride and he vented and he's sort of somewhat at peace and decides to head back home, which ultimately back home for him to Michael's house always takes him by Deborah's house. And Deborah, being the social butterfly that she is, she's out on her stoop again, but with friends. And she's probably a little buzzed. She's had a couple of beers. She's feeling good. And Alex just happens to pass by and she reactionarily notices him and without catching herself, just yells out at him in a fun way what the car represents and getting hit by the car. That whole idea of like, until it punches you in the face, you don't deal with it. And this is actually cathartic in a way for Alex. And it's actually a good thing for Alex because it's his wake up call. And That's what getting hit by the car means. After you get injuries to your face, you go and you stare at yourself in the mirror and look at them. So that's a very literal motivator to make this scene be in the bathroom staring at himself in the mirror. But there's a figurative, deeper level meaning to this scene. He's got to deal with himself. And so he's got to stand and look at himself in the mirror. The metaphorical way that you've got to look yourself in the mirror and you got to ask yourself, what are you going to do? We then bring the room into the color scheme and the color motif of the figure's world. This yellowish, greeny, muddy world. Just for that moment that he's at the height of his scream. And if you notice, as he lets the scream fade out, the world comes back to normal from a lighting and color standpoint. You know, because we're resolving the figure in this scene, why don't we see that one last time? And so that's how we came to decide, well, it would happen when he's screaming.
Each different person that would join the crew had their own little unique set of tools that would just propel the same story farther. The story never changed. There were so many different tweaks that just made it the strongest story that it could be. And then a lot of the production design choices were kind of tweaking the environment and the atmosphere that these characters were going to populate. So it was an incredible experience from the very first meeting. And when I moved up to Chicago and kind of had that honeymoon infatuation period with Chicago is where most of this story blossomed from. And so to have that story be brought to life by a group of creative artists who live in Chicago, who inhabit that city, was incredible.